Okay, good evening. Mazel tov to the Rosens. We are learning Maseches Horiyos. We're going to start at the bottom of Hey Amid Aleph, at the first of the very long lines, Amar Mar. Yesterday, at the end of the day, we learned the Brisa, and now we're going to pick apart that Brisa. And Amir Hashem, we'll get toward the bottom of Vav Amid Aleph, which would be most of, I think it's today's blot. I don't even know
What's
anymore.
What's today?
I think today's Vav. So we'll do half of today's. You want to come back in 20 minutes? You can come back in 20 minutes.
Come back and play.
It's
Yeah.
hard stuff. I can't.
It's hard.
I can't do it twice.
That's why you should do it twice.
I know.
Whatever. That's not. Here we go. Omar Mar, the Brisa taught us v'noda hachatas v'lo shiyodu hachotin, that if Bezdin wasn't clear about a psak on their own, they couldn't find out later from the people. They had to have clarity. If the Bezdin is going to bring a par helam davar shel tzibur, they needed to know what their mistake was in. Was it in chaylev or was it in dam? That was the case we spoke about at the end of the day yesterday. Says the Gemara, Mantana, who's the author of this? I'm Rabbi Yehuda Marav. The author of this line is V'yitema Rava, the lo Rabbi Eliezer. Well, we don't know who it is, but we know who it isn't. It's not Rabbi Eliezer. What does he say? It's not. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer, man of shach, no sarach chayiv. It doesn't matter. One way or the other, you're chayiv. That's not our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, no, you have to know which Isser you did. So clearly our Mishnah is not Rabbi Eliezer. Says the Gemara, not necessarily true. Rabbi Eliezer. We could even say that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Eliezer. How do you make the two fit? Our Mishnah says you need to know what the Isser is that you did. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, you don't. How do we make them fit? Says the Gemara, shiny hacha. By our case, by the case of the Horiyos case, where the Dayan weren't sure what Isser they sanctioned. So there it says, that they made a sin about it. That means that you have to know about it. So says the Gemara, Hasam Nami, that's not a good question. In the case of Rabbi Eliezer too, there too it says, so there too we see the same pasuk. So perhaps Rav Ashi wants to say that maybe we should say that really we can say that way. No, we can't. Says Gemara, yes, we can. Hahu, that language of Asher Chataba was miboile prat misasek, for a person who did an isser while they were being misasek. He wasn't intending on eating chaylev. He picked up the fat, he thought it was kosher, and he just ate it. That's a case of misasek. Now what we're going to do is go through the shitas of the Tanaim that we saw over the last many days. Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, Reb Meir, and Reb Shimon ben Elazar. So says the Gemara, my taima to Reb Yehuda. What is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda's shita? Don't worry, we'll repeat Rabbi Yehuda's shita over here. And here's one of those times where all the shitas that we saw in the Mishnah were the very surface layer. It was an iceberg, but underneath there was a wellspring of Torah learning and trying to figure out the psukim. Let's see what Rabbi Yehuda said and what was driving his shitas. Says the Gemara, my time of Rabbi Yehuda, because kasavar arba kahal sivi. We have the word kahal 4 times. We actually don't. We have the word 2 times of hakahal and hakahal. But the Gemara says in one case it's kahal hakahal. This is the pasuk that says in kol adas Yisrael yishku v'ne'elam davar menei hakahal. That's pasuk number 1. And the second one is kahal hakahal, where we also learn from the extra letter hey, where that pasuk says, and they're both in Vayikra, they're only one pasuk apart. The next pasuk says v'yikrivu hakahal. So we see the word hakahal is used twice. There's the word kahal itself, 1 and 2. We have 2 of those. And then we have the extra letters of hey. So he holds that we have 4 drushas to make. Now let's see how he holds all 4 drushas pan out. What does Rabbi Yehuda hold? Chad, we're 4 lines into the wide lines. Chad l'chayv al kol kahal v'kal. Every kahal is going to have their own chiyuv. Every shevet, we'll see. Chad, one of time that it says kahal is to teach us lo ra tluya bebezdin u'maisa tluya bekahal. One is that the bezdin has to be the one that gives the bad psak, and the Jews have to be the ones that violate the psak or listen to it. Bechad the greira. One word kahal is to teach us that even if only 5 or 6 or 7 of the shvatim did the isser, that we're gorer the other shvatim, we drag the other shvatim that they too have to bring a korban. And last but not least is v'chad the shevet she'asa b'ras bezin. And the last is to say to forget about the whole tzibur. What if only shevet Ruvain did the isser? What if only shevet Levi did the isser? There too we would say that v'chad the shevet she'asa b'ras bezin. If only shevet X did an isser, they too will be culpable. They too will be held accountable Bezdin will be held accountable for what they did. Reb Shimon, who holds differently than Rabbi Yehuda. Why did he hold differently? Because he couldn't learn all 4 words of kahal from the psukim. Why not? Reb Shimon tlasa kahal sivi. He holds that only 3 of the 4 were reasonable. Why were only 3 of the 4 reasonable? Because v'chad lo ra tluya bebezdin u'maisa tluya. Sorry, Reb Shimon, he says kahal and hakahal. One of the words kahal was not actually usable because meinei hakahal orchei dekrahu. He says that because that was actually just the way people talk. that letter hey was not learnable. And he gives just a mushal head yod. Look at what he says. When people say me'ene diplanya, from the eyes of person X, diplanya, me'ene ha-kahal, of the kahal, and that's what the Gemara is saying over here. It's not a usable drasha. That's lashon b'nei adam. It's the way people talk. You therefore cannot utilize that particular drasha, and therefore he only has three things to darshan. What does Reb Shimon hold? Number one, chad l'chai b'al kol kal v'kal, similar. V'trei achrini, the other two are to teach us something totally different. Ne'emar lemata kal and v'ne'emar lemala kal. Malahalan bezdini ma'akahal, because he said, remember that it's not just the kahal that brings the parhalam davar shel tzibor. It's the tzibor and the kahal. Afkan bezdini ma'akahal. What about Rav Meir Shita? Rav Meir Zog, he said differently. Kahal ha-kahal lo darish. He doesn't learn the extra haze at all, which means we only have two things left. If you have only the words hakahal and he doesn't darshan haze, there's no four. It's just two. It's just the word hakahal and hakahal, but the letter hey is irrelevant. So there's only two drashas. So says the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom. Hilkach trei kal leksivi. Mi boile Rameir learns like this. L'ne'emar lemata kal v'ne'emar lemala kal. V'alahalan bezdin below tzibor. He learns differently than the previous shita of Reb Shimon. He holds that no, it's bezdin without the tzibor. Afkan bezdin below tzibor, and that's how he explains his shita. So let's just chazer before we get to the next shita. We're trying to figure out all the shitas that we learned on Shabbos. How do we learn them up? We learn them up by trying to understand how they look at the word hakahal. According to the most unique shita, hakahal, two different psukim. It's not only the word kahal, but also the hey. So ha-kahal is 4. That is Rabbi Yehuda. One of those can't be used by Reb Shimon, so he says it's 3. And Nachma, we reduced him even more by Reb Meir because he says, I don't learn the letter hey at all. Now we're down to 2. What about the last shita? We are 2 lines from the bottom. Reb Shimon Elazar my taima. Ksiv v'haya im me'enei ha'ida alma mi'uta t'chsiv me'enei. From this, but not all of this. U'chsiv ki l'chol ha'am bishkaga l'meimra deruba in mi'uta lo. He learns from here that it has to be only when there's a majority, but not when there is a minority. That's how he learns the shita that he learns. Ha'ketzad. So what then does Reb Shimon ben Elazar say is the din? He says asuvav ve'hein rubo shel kahal. 6. If you have 6 different shvatim that are doing something wrong, and they are the majority, Ozayin, or 7 shvatim, afal pishe ein rubo shel kahal chayavet. That's what the Gemara says. That's how he learns his drasha. We saw this yesterday as well. That brings us to the top of Hamid Bey. The Gemara says as follows: Reb Shimon ben Reb Meir. These 2 shitas of Reb Shimon and Reb Meir that they hold the hora tulia bebezdin umaisa tulia bekal minalahu. What is their shita? That if Bezdin is the one that does the error, they make the bad psak, and the Jews are the one who do the isser, they listen to Bezdin, they're the ones who made a mistake. How do we know that this has to be the mix? How do we know that it can't be that Bezdin is the one that does the isser and not the Jews? How do we know that? So Amar Abaye, he holds one pasuk, Rava is going to add another, and then we're going to explain why we have both. Amar Abaye, so he says we learn from there that it has to be from Bezdin who gives the psak, and then the yidden fall to they make the mistake. Who did it in the pasuk? They did it. Rava says not enough, insufficient. We need to add another pasuk. He holds. He says we need. I'm sorry. We need another pasuk. Says the Gemara v'tzricha. Him at base 5 lines down. Why do we need the extra pasuk? So says the Gemara as follows. If you only had the pasuk about Baye, we would have thought that even if the minority of the Jews were to have done this iser, that Bezdin would have been chayv parhalam davar shel tzibor. That's not true. That's why we had the next pasuk of l'chol ha'am bishkaga. Because of l'chol ha'am bishkaga, if we only had the pasuk of Rava, we might have thought that we would then include Bezdin as part of the majority who did the iser. That's not true either. Says the Gemara, wait a second. Neither of these psukim are eligible to be used. You can't learn anything back to our case. Remember, we started at the top of this page. Why is it that Reb Shimon and Reb Meir were of the opinion that it is Bezdin who gives the psak and the people who do the iser mehechatesi? Perhaps it should be even Bezdin that does the iser. Why can't we use these psukim? Asks the Gemara. These psukim are not available for us to use. They're actually being used by others. They're being used by the halachos of avodah zara, not by parhalam davar shel tzibor. So says the Gemara, don't worry, yalfinan me'enei. We have 2 psukim that use the word me'enei, one from the world of avodah zara, bridging back over to the world of parhalam davar shel tzibor, and therefore we can learn over to this area, and that's why Reb Shimon and Reb Meir hold that Harah Tzli Bebezdin or Maisa Tzli Bekal, that Bezdin has to give the psak, and in order to trigger Par Halam Davar Shel Tzibor, a regular Isser of Bezdin making a mistake in Horiyos is only if the Yidden violated, not Bezdin. We had the next part of the mission, a third of the way down. Of course, it's a Zafta Gadaf. We'll get through it. Horu Bezdin Shel Echad. And we don't yet know what the question is. Let's see what the question is of the Gemara. Iboya Luhu. And then we're going to get into a lamdish piece of Gemara. Shevet Echad the Rebbe Yehuda behoras Bezdin Gadol. According to Rebbe Yehuda, what if there was only one Shevet? Let's pick Shevet Yisachar. They violated the Isser behoras Bezdin Agadol. So Bezdin Agadol said you're allowed to eat chaylev. And Shevet Yisachar drank the Kool-Aid. They totally fell for it, and they ate the chaylev. Mi maisu shar shvatim olo. Would it be the case that that they would have to be chayiv in a parhalim davar shel tzibor? Yes or no? Mi amrina, do we say shiva shvatim hu demaisu shar shvatim ba'adayim mishum leikaruba? Do we say that it's only when there are 7 shvatim? Oh, aval chad shevet delekaruba lo. But anything that's less than half of Klal Yisrael, there would be no parhalim davar shel tzibor if it was only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shvatim. Oh, dil maloshna. Or would we say it doesn't matter? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or even a majority, 7, 8, 9, it doesn't matter. Yes, maybe we would still say that you're chayav for a parhalim davar shel tzibor. And this is all going to be within the camp of Rebbe Yehuda. So let's see, we're going to see 2 answers here, and that will bring us to yet another shaila for the day. Here's answer number 1. Says the Gemara, a third of the way down, a little bit more. Tashma. We have a brisa. The brisa says, Mahain Mivian. What would they bring for this error, for this scenario of a Horiyos case? So it says the Gemara, Mahain Mivian par echad. They would bring 1 par. Reb Shimon Omer, Shnei parim. No, we will bring Shnei parim. We'll bring 2. Okay, let's analyze the brisa and see how we can figure it out and circle back to our question. We had asked, what about a miut of shvatim? Would they be chayiv if they listened to Bezdin? Would Bezdin be chayiv par halam davar shel tzibor? Let's see. The mayaskinon. Ile mushachatu shiva. If what you're saying is that 7 different shvatim failed, Reb Shimon Tmanya boy, then the brisa couldn't say that Reb Shimon only requires 2. Reb Shimon would require 8 based on the principles that we learned on the bottom of the previous Amud and from the Mishnah that we learned on Shabbos. Ella, it must be the chata shevet echad. And b'mai, I behoras beis dino in the singular. If it was only the bezdin of the local shevet, well then Reb Shimon Leisle. Reb Shimon doesn't hold that the local bezdin is sufficient to create a scenario for par halam davar shel tzibor. He holds that we only have par halam davar shel tzibor. We only have a din of Horiyos when it's the Sanhedrin Agadol, when the bezdin Agadol, not for a local shevet. El lalav, it must be boras bezdin Gadol. That's our case. Our case was, what if a miut of shvatim fell for it and they did the isser that the bezdin Hagadol paskin was mutter? Would that be the case? And the Tanakama said par echad. Reb Shimon said shnei parim. So let's see the Tanakama money. Who would be the author who said there's only 1 par? He named a Reb Meir. Harubabai can't be Reb Meir, because we learned already from the psukim on the bottom of the previous page, from the Kahal Drashas, that Reb Meir holds that we need a rov. So the Tanakama who says that it's par echad can't be Reb Meir. Elalav, it must be Reb Yehuda, in which case we see that according to Reb Yehuda, even if it's a minority of shvatim, we still see that it would be a case of par halam davar shel tzibor, and we have a beautiful answer. So it says the Gemara halfway down, 4 lines before the wide lines on Hamid Beis. Says the Gemara, maybe make that 3 lines. Amrei, hacha b'mayaskina. No, not necessarily true. Maybe we don't have to say this brisa is muchrach to be like Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, hacha b'mayaskina. What is this brisa talking about? The brisa brought a third of the way down where it says mahein mevi'in par echad. Says the Gemara, that case was talking about kegon shechatu shisha shvatim hein ruban shalkal. Really 6 shvatim violated. They did what Sanhedrin said. They ate the chalev that Sanhedrin paskin incorrectly about, and it was 51%. But it's not within Reb Yehuda, because we can also explain that brisa within Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Titania. What does Reb Shimon ben Elazar hold? Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishmo Chatu Shisha Vehein Rubo Shalkal Oshiva Afal Pisha En Rubo Shalkal Mevian Par in the singular. So the brisa that we saw 1/3 of the way down, we tried to ask the following question within Reb Yehuda: what if only 1 shevet was to violate the issur that the Sanhedrin Agadol had paskin dan? So the Gemara says, no, it's not necessarily Reb Yehuda. It could be Reb Shimon ben Elazar, and therefore there's no raya that it could be Reb Yehuda. So we're back to our question. According to Reb Yehuda, what would he say about a miut of shvatim if they listen to the Sanhedrin Agadol? Let's try our second answer toward the end of the first of the very long lines on Hayamid Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shevet sha'asu behoras beis dino, oso ha-shevet chayv, u'sh'ar kol ha-shvatim pturim. Black on white, we see our case clear. What is the case over there? That we have one shevet who listened to their bezdin. That shevet is chayv, and nobody else is. Ubehoras bezdin hagadol afidu shar shvatim chayv shma mino. So we see over here that really, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, we would say that you are going to be chayv in such a case. Amar Rav Ashi, 2/3 of the way down. Masnisa namideka. I can show you from our Mishnah that this is likely to be true, because Diktani, what did we say in this Mishnah that we just saw? But also hashevet al pm. Also hashevet chayv u'shar kol hashvatim turim. We said only one shevet is going to be chayv, not everybody else. Lama li lemisno shar shvatim turim. That's a basic diuk. Hatana, we already said also hashevet chayv. The cave in the Tana also shevet chayv. Memeli yad inon shar shvatim pturim. That's a very obvious diuk. I don't need you to write the extra words. Ella, because there were these extra words, Hakamash Malon, the Baras Bezdino, who Deshar Baras Bezdino, Deshar Shvatim Termaval, Baras Bezdin Agadol, if you Deshar Shvatim Chayavim, Shmami no. So we do see, we started this question at the 2 dots, a quarter of the way down, a third of the way down. Now we have our answer, is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, we would say that this is a case of Parhalam Davar Shal Tzibor, even if only Shevet Yisachar listened to Bezdin Agadol, they ate the Chaylev, Rabbi Yehuda would say that they are going to be Chayav, that Bezdin will be Chayav to bring a Korban. Let's talk about the next question that's available here. It says the Gemara, Shevet Echad She'asa Be'oraz based in Agadol Reb Shimon Mimai Siolo. According to the Shita of Reb Shimon, had it been that there was Shevet Echad that listened to the Bezdin Agadol, we asked recently about Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're asking about Reb Shimon. How would he hold? Mimai Siolo. Tashma. Let's see. Same brisa. Mahen Mevian Parechad. Reb Shimon Omer Shnei Parim. Oh, so we already saw his Shita that he holds Shnei Parim. Now we have to pick apart this brisa from his perspective, where in the parentheses, 3/4 of the way down, if 7 shvatim did the iser, says the Gemara, shnei parim. Why does the Brisa say that Reb Shimon says you only require 2? Pasha, that's not true. Shmona parim, boy. He would need 7 plus 1, 7 because of the 7 shvatim, and Bezdin has to bring 1 as well because he learned that the kahal, remember the drushes of kahal ha-kahal, he held that there were tlasa kale, and he made a gzera shava from the 2 of the words to teach me that not only does the shevet have to bring, but Bezdin does as well. That's how we get to 8. So then that can't be our Mishnah. That can't be the little brisa we learned. Ella, it must be the chata shevet echad. Ubemai. What was the scenario where one shevet violated? Ilema boras bezdino Reb Shimon Leslie. Can't be that we're talking about the shevet dayan, the shevet bezdin. It has to be the bezdin agadol because Reb Shimon himself doesn't hold that there would be a case of parhalam davar shal tzibur with just the bezdin of shevet yisachar. He needs sanhedrin agadol. So says the Gemara, you're right. So Ilema Shachatu Shiva Shnei Parim, no way. Sorry. Ilema Beras Beistino Reb Shimon Leslie. Ella, it must be Beras Beistino Bestin Gadol. So now we see our case scenario that Reb Shimon says you're chayev. It must be that there was one shevet that violated. He would hold that there are 2 korbanos, one for the shevet, one for Bezdin, because that's what we learned his rules are. It's always going to be the kahal im Bezdin, and therefore we have our answer. Seemingly we have our answer. So says the Gemara, no dice. B'tizbara, how can you even make such a comparison? Tanakama money. Who would be the author that says that there's only 1 korban to be brought? Irav Meir Habai Ruva. If you want to say that the case that Reb Shimon is talking about is where only 1 shevet violated, there's no way that Tanakama could be Reb Meir, because Reb Meir says you need a rove, not 1 shevet. Irav Yehuda Shar Shvatim Nami Maisu. According to Reb Yehuda, who holds of Greira, that once we have some of the Shvatim who are chayiv, all the Shvatim are chayiv. So then who's the Tanakama? Yes, Elah money must be Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Like we saw earlier, the fact that the Tanakama is like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that ruins the possibility that this Mishnah is talking about what we think it's talking about, and therefore our answer falls apart. Let's try again. We still don't have the answer for Reb Shimon. How would Reb Shimon hold in this case? 10 lines from the bottom. Tashma. We have a brisa that says, according to the Chachamim, the nameless Chachamim that we'll have to analyze, they say that it's only with Bezdin Agadol, not the Shevet heads, not the Bezdin of anyone Shevet, but Bezdin Agadol, Sanhedrin, who's at in the Lishkas HaGazis, only they would be able to generate a case of Par Halam Davar Shal Tzibur. Man Chachamim. Who is that sheet of the Chachamim? Ilema, if you want to say Reb Meir Rubaboy. It can't be that it's Reb Meir. Reb Meir holds of row. We're only talking about 1 shevet doing something wrong, not 7. Elalav, it must be Reb Shimon. He Shma Mino. So this taka does work. That now we see that Reb Shimon does hold that that we're talking about this brisa, and therefore he holds that even 1 shevet would be chayiv. And we answered our question both according to Reb Yehuda, now according to Reb Shimon. The Gemara now asks both according to Reb Yehuda of Reb Shimon They want to know the following. Shevet echad ikri kahal minalu. This part's easier than the rest we've been learning. How do we know that one shevet is referred to as a kahal? We have a lot of shows, kahal adas yishurin, kahal chasidim. We have a lot of names like that. Me'echa tesi that you're a kahal. Maybe a kahal's only all of Klal Yisrael. Maybe it's not one shul. And let's just talk about this case. Maybe it's not one shevet. But both of them seem to feel that one shevet would be held accountable, which means that they're a kahal, because those are the drushas of the words, arba kahale. So we see that each individual shevet is called a kahal. How do they know that? Amrei, so says the Gemara, they wanted to answer the chsi by Amod Yoshafar B'Kahal Yehuda Yerushalayim Nocha Chatzar Beis Hashem Hachadasha. So what do we see? Yerushalayim was Yehuda and Binyamin. And we see that these small number of Shvatim were referred to as a Kahal. Beautiful. We have our Raya. Says the Gemara, first of all, Ma'ai Chadasha, what was new in Jerusalem at that time? What was new in Yerushalayim? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan, Shechidshu Dvaram Ve'amru Tvul Yom Al Yikanis B'Machna Leviyah. There was a Chiddush on that day that we learned something unique, that a person who was a Tvul Yom, let's say a Baal Keri, he went to the mikveh in the morning, he still couldn't serve. Even if he was a Levi, he couldn't sing, he couldn't be Misharis in the Beis HaMikdash. Why not? Because he was a Tvul Yom. He went to the mikveh, but he had to wait for Herav Shemesh. So that din was a Chiddush din that we learned on that day. Either way, Maskif Lo Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Mimai. How do we know this pasuk where it says B'Kahal Yehuda Yerushalayim? How do we know that that's even one shevet? After all, Dilma Shani Yerushalayim Dahava Nabi Binyamin. Yerushalayim was basically split down the middle. That Shevet Yehud had half, Shevet Binyamin had another half. So says the Gemara, maybe the word Kahal there was talking about two groupings and not one. So says the Gemara, Elama Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Let's give a better answer to Chsid, because the pasuk says, at that time, Binyamin hadn't been born yet. This was Yaakov talking. Manis Shaita Binyamin. Only one shevet was born after that. What does that show you? That a kahal is even one shevet. Yaakov is going to have one more kahal. He already had 11 kids. So what is one more kahal? Must be that one shevet is one kahal. Amarle Reb Shiva, Rav Kahana, Dil Mahachi Kamarle Rachmana. Maybe it's not like you say. No. Maybe Binyamin was born and it rounded out to the number 12, and 12 is a kahal. Maybe that's what it means. Says the Gemara, Amarle, Elishnemasar Shvatim Ikru Kahal, Acharasar Shvatim Lo Ikru Kahal. What a strange Havamina, that only 12 Shvatim is a kahal, but 11 isn't. There was 11 before Binyamin. What if Binyamin hadn't been born? We would have said that it's not considered a kahal. Pasha, we would have said that. So Ella, it must not be that way. It must be like we said, that we learned from this pasuk by Binyamin being born, when Yaakov says, that even one shevet is considered a kahal. That brings us to the Brisa, 3 lines from the bottom. Tanya, the Brisa says, Omer, Reb Shimon Omer, Ma Talmud Lomar upar sheni ben bakar tikach lechatas. A second par, which was a small cow, was brought as a chatas. It sounds like it's all out of left field because we weren't talking about this, but we'll see it. We'll circle back to our case on the top of the next Amud. If you want this pasuk to teach me that it's a par sheni that I know I have to bring 2, I already know I have to bring 2. One's a chatas and one's an ola. I already know from the pasuk. This is talking about korbanos brought by Levim. I already know that. So it says the Gemara, Ella, you might have thought you were able to eat these korbanos. Talmud par sheni. Sheni laola. What does it mean? Sheni is an ola. Ma'ola lo ne'echeles. Just like an ola is not allowed to be eaten. Top of Vav Amud Aleph. Chatas lo ne'echeles. So too, when it comes to the chatas, that also can't be eaten. A unique din that even though it's a chatas, normally a chatas is the type of food that's eaten. We're not allowed to eat this particular food. Welcome to the club. Oh, you're not learning. Okay, fine. It says the Gemara, Kayotze bo Amar Reb Yosi. Kayotze bo Amar Reb Yosi. The pasuk says as follows: Haboy me'ashvi hagol lahikrivu alos elokei Yisrael parim shnei masar hakol ola. What does this pasuk mean? Hakol ola. It says the Gemara, Hakol ola sal kadaitach. It's not true. Yeah. Not all the korbanos that were brought were olas. Some of the korbanos were brought that were chatas. So why does the pasuk say Hakol ola? It must be ma'ola lo ne'echeles av chatas lo ne'echeles. This particular chatas was not eaten. Titania, because the Brisa says, and again, we're still not connected yet back to our Horiyos cases. We'll come back to it shortly. 6-7 lines down, Vav Amud Aleph. We're going to be heading toward the end of the short lines, maybe a drop further. So it says the Gemara, Titania, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Alavodas kochavim hevium, V'amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that these korbanos were brought on avodas kochavim. What does Rav Yehuda or Shmuel say? Al avodas kochavim she'asu b'mei tzidkiyahu. These are korbanos that would have been brought. They should have been brought for the crimes at the end of the first Beis Hamikdash. By the time of Tzidkiyahu, he was the last one at the end of the time of the first Beis Hamikdash, and they did avodas kochavim, so they had to bring korbanos. So says the Gemara, Bishlam al Rabbi Yehuda. I understand these korbanos that were brought that needed to be brought at the end of Tzidkiyahu, but then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. Now they want to bring them at the beginning of Bayis Sheni, a gap of 70 years. So says the Gemara, Mishkachas la, I understand Shitas Rabbi Yehuda, Shnei Masar Chatos. How do we get 12 korbanos that we saw earlier in the pasuk? How do we have that? That's 3 lines from the top of the page. It says Shnei Masar. How do we get to 12? Kigon dechatu Shnei Masar Shvatim, Demaisu Shnei Masar Seirim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, I understand the pasuk by the Levim about the korbanos if each of these Shvatim did something wrong. Inami dechatu Shiva Shvatim Ushe'ara Inach Begrira. Or a majority of Shvatim did something wrong, and the others, because of Greira, Rabbi Yehuda holds of Greira, that once 7 do an Isser, the other 5 have to bring the Korban anyways. Fine. I understand how I can get to 12 in this pasuk. How we get to 12 Korbanos even according to Reb Shimon. You go into Chatu Echad Asar Shvatim. 11 might have done something wrong. Remember what he always does? Bezdin always strips on another, always add another. They're Mosif. Got it. But with all of this talk about the korbanos by the Levim, we have a problem. Reb Meir, we're a third of the way down on Vav Mid Aleph. According to Reb Meir, to Amar Bezdin Mivin Velot Tzibor, Shnei Masar Hechi Mishkachas La. Reb Meir doesn't even hold that the tzibur would ever bring. So how could he ever have a case scenario where there's 12 korbanos? Says the Gemara, Kigon dechatu v'hadar chatu ad trei sar zimni. The same Shevet made the same mistake 12 times. But otherwise, he would have no explanation because he would need it to be a rove. He has a different cheshbon because Bezdin would bring the korban, not the shvatim. So his math could never get to 12 unless the Shevet went through this 12. It's an impossible situation. It's a theoretical possibility. That's what he says. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, we have a fundamental problem. The people who lived at the end of Chorban Bayis Rishon, before the Chorban of Bayis Rishon, they had to bring korbanos. They brought them by Bayis Sheni. Did people live that long? Says the Gemara, V'hamaisu lehu hanhu dechatu. The people who had to bring the chatas, they died already because it's been 70 years, and that's not allowed because you're not. It's chatas meis. What's the line? Chatas shemesu be'aleha b'misa. You're not allowed to bring their korban. If a person has to bring a chatas, they separate the animal, they're mafresh, and then they die. Korban cannot be brought anymore. So all the people who had to bring from the times of Tzidkiyahu at the end of the first Beis Hamikdash, now their korbanos are being brought by Bayis Sheni. They're all dead. How can you bring the chatas? Amar Rav Papa, Kikmiri, when we have the tradition that chatas shemesu be'aleh b'misa, that if a person dies, you can't bring their chatas, that's only true hanimi lebiyachid. That's only true when the korbanos that were being brought represented individuals. Aval lo b'tzibur lefi she'ein misa b'tzibur. You're right, individuals may have died, but the Klal Yisrael tzibur, the din of a tzibur never changed. You were always a tzibur. Even without a Beis Hamikdash, you were still a tzibur. The individuals, doesn't matter. There's a din of tzibur. And because these korbanos were being brought for the chatas of all of the yidden who did the averas and not yichidim, therefore we don't worry about the din of chatas shemesu be'aleh. Says the Gemara halfway down on Vav Amid Aleph, Minalei l'Rav Papa. How does Rav Papa know that there's a din, that the din of chatas shemesu be'aleh doesn't apply but tzibur? So he says, that particular pasuk, look on the side if you want the context of pasuk in Tehillim. That pasuk's not talking about tzibur, that's talking about even about a yachid, so you can't learn anything from there. Ella diyuka should say, Ella diyuka de Rav Papa misiir de Rosh Chodesh. Oh, we're going to learn from Rosh Chodesh, out of left field yet again, right? What does it mean out of Rosh Chodesh? We're going to learn from the world of Rosh Chodesh that the din of chatas shemesu be'aleha doesn't apply when it's about a tzibur. Let's see. Tamar Rachmana, maisi mitrumas halishka, that they paid for it from the lishka. How can you do that? V'hamaisi lehumi Yisrael, v'hanach defaishu heichi maisu. Maybe people who gave to the lishka died, right? The korban Rosh Chodesh is being brought. Maybe these korbanos were given from Yidden who died already. We don't care. We don't care. That's not even a talking point. As long as we have a tzibur, and Baruch Hashem, we are promised that we always will, however complex the world is, there will always be a Klal Yisrael. We don't have to worry about the din of chatas shemesu be'aleh. We always apply it as long as there's a din tzibur. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. You're pulling from an unrelated field. Mi dami sir Rosh Chodesh. How can you pull from Rosh Chodesh back to our case of korbanos by avodas kochavim? Too far away. Dilma lo ma'asu mitzibur. Says the Gemara, maybe nobody died. Aval hacha by the case of Rosh Chodesh, maybe nobody died from the giving side. It's all theoretical. But it's for sure the case that over 70 years, people died. Aval Hacha, by the 70 years later case of bringing korbanos that really were done in violation during the first Beis HaMikdash, Vadai Maisu, Pashut, that people died over those 70 years. Elataima de Rapapa, 2/3 of the way down, Mehacha. The Gemara says from the world of Egla Arufa, Parshas Shoftim, which we just had a couple of weeks ago. Ru'uya kapara zusha techaper al yotze Mitzrayim. This kapara that we do by the Egla Rufa, we hit it over the neck, all the medida, all the measuring. We've learned about this in other Maseches. Midichsiv asher padisa. What do we see over there? We see the language of asher padisa, and it's true even for yotze Mitzrayim. Oh, that was a long time ago. Elamai, it must be that there's a din of tzibur. That the chatas shemeisu be'aleh can be mechaper on old things. Even though they are not immediate, it could be thousands of years ago. A chatas we bring today, if it's a din of a tzibur, it's mechaper. As long as it's not for a yachid, you're good to go. Says the Gemara Midami, how can you compare to the world of Egla Arufa? Hasam by Egla Arufa Kulu Aisinon. It has kapara on everyone. Nigud mechaper achaim, mechaper nami amesif. That gives kapara on people who are alive and people who are dead. Elahacha, but in our case, mihavu chaim. Was there anyone left from the Churban, from the first Beis HaMikdash who lived to the second one? Says the Gemara, in Halchanami. There were people who lived. It was 70 years. It's a long time. But we have people who are still alive from the Holocaust 75 years ago. It's not so, again, our life expectancy is different now. But yes, there were people. Says the Gemara Techsiv, as the Pasuk says, V'Rabbi mehakon v'alvim v'roshe ha'avos v'gomer. Really, the rest of the Pasuk is the Eker. Ha'avos v'hazakenim asher roes habayis harishon biyosto. This is a state. That's what it says directly in Ezra. Maybe there wasn't a lot of the people who were there, only a minority. No. Says the Gemara, Haksiv, v'lo hikiru b'kol truas hasimcha l'kol bechi ha'am v'hakol nishma ad l'meirachok. We're not going to go into the pasuk, but that pasuk basically means that yes, there were people who lived there from both Batei Mikdash, and there was a rove of people. There was a significant number of people that lived from Bayis Rishon to Bayis Sheni. 2 more lines. Wait 1 second. Hold on. First of the long lines. When they did this Isser at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash of Avodah Zarah, it was on purpose. We don't bring a chatas when something is bemazed. That's not normal. Why are we trying to be mechaper and bringing a kapara on something that's old? So it says the Gemara, the korbanos that were being brought in the early times of the second Beis HaMikdash, on behalf of the crimes at the end of the first Beis HaMikdash, was a horash shah. We were trying to be mechaper. Hashem said, we got to get the yin some kapara. You're right, the rules don't apply here. Afal Pikin, you can still bring a korban. Hachanami mistabra, dilote machi, ayalam tiyashim meshisha kvasim shivim v'shiva keneged mi. This large number of korbanos that was brought at that time, where did the number come from? That those large number of animals that were brought, as quoted in the Pasuk in Ezra, that was Harasha. Hachanami Harasha. He said that even though over here we were in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, trying to get kapara on that which was done, b'mezid b'bayis rishon, Harasha. He said that's where the korbanos were brought. We'll stop right here at Tanu Rabbanan, 3 lines into the wide lines on Vav Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.